Why ancient humans ate rotten meat on purpose and didn't die. Somewhere in a frozen valley, 40,000 years ago, a group of humans stands over a dead mammoth. It's been dead for 6 days. The smell hits before you even see it. Flies are already there. The meat has turned green in places, black in others. Any modern person would gag and walk away. They didn't walk away, they ate it. And they didn't just survive, many of them thrived on food that would send you to a hospital today. This isn't a myth. This isn't some fringe theory. This is one of the most well documented and most disturbing facts about how our ancestors actually lived. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something that sounds impossible. For most of human history, rotten wasn't dangerous, it was dinner. Stick around because the reason why is stranger than you think, and it's still hiding inside your own body right now. Let's clear something up first because this is where almost everyone gets it wrong. When you think rotten meat, you're picturing something specific. Meat sitting on a kitchen counter for a week, covered in the wrong kind of bacteria, the kind that gives you food poisoning. That fear is correct. That kind of rot can kill you. But that is not what most ancient humans were eating. What they were eating is closer to what scientists actually call high meat, or in more precise terms, meat in various stages of controlled decomposition. And there's a massive difference between decomposition that's dangerous and decomposition that's actually a form of natural fermentation. Here's the key idea to hold on to for the rest of this video. Not all bacteria are enemies. Some bacteria are actually working in your favor, breaking down proteins into forms your body can use faster, producing vitamins your body can't make on its own. And this is the wild part, outcompeting the truly dangerous bacteria before they ever get a foothold. Ancient humans didn't understand microbiology. They didn't have a single word for bacteria, but through tens of thousands of years of trial, error, and death, they built up an intuitive, inherited knowledge of exactly which kind of rotten was food and which kind was poison. The clearest evidence for this comes from the far north, the Arctic and subarctic peoples, from ancient Inuit groups to the Sami and various Siberian populations. In these environments, refrigeration wasn't a luxury of ice and freezers the way we think of it. It was the only option most of the year, but that also created a problem. Fresh meat froze solid within hours, becoming almost impossible to eat, chew, or digest efficiently in life-threatening cold, where every calorie mattered and every wasted movement could cost you body heat you couldn't get back. So certain groups developed something that sounds horrifying to modern ears: intentional, controlled fermentation of whole animals. The most famous example is something called kiviak, still made today in parts of Greenland. Small birds packed whole, feathers and all, into a sealed sealskin and left to ferment for months under rocks. When it's opened, the meat inside has broken down into something with the texture of soft cheese, and it's eaten as a delicacy, sometimes at celebrations. Modern nutritionists who've studied this were stunned to find the fermentation process actually increases the bioavailability of certain vitamins, especially vitamin C, which is otherwise almost impossible to get in an environment with zero fruits, zero vegetables, and months of permanent darkness. Let that sink in. A food that looks like decay was, in some cases, a life-saving source of a vitamin that prevents scurvy. Without it, whole populations in the Arctic might not have survived long enough to reproduce. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't ignorance. It was a solution passed down through generations, refined over centuries, to a problem modern people never have to think about. How do you get a vitamin your body needs in a place where nothing green grows for 8 months of the year? Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because the food itself is only half the story. The other half is what was happening inside the humans eating it. Human stomach acid is dramatically more acidic than most people realize, closer to battery acid than to lemon juice. This isn't an accident of evolution. A hyperacidic stomach is one of the best natural defenses against harmful bacteria that exists in the animal kingdom. Compare us to something like a cow, whose stomach is far less acidic because it evolved to slowly ferment plants with the help of bacteria. Humans evolved the opposite strategy, a stomach acidic enough to kill most of what would hurt us before it even reaches the intestines. On top of that, ancient humans who regularly ate partially fermented meat weren't the same, biologically, as someone eating it for the first time today. Their gut microbiomes, the trillions of bacteria living in their intestines, were shaped from childhood to handle it. Populations exposed to a specific type of food generation after generation develop microbiomes specialized to process it safely. This is the same reason some populations today can eat foods considered high risk by Western food safety standards: fermented fish sauces, aged and cured meats, certain raw dairy products, without the reactions someone unfamiliar with them would have. In other words, it wasn't magic and it wasn't luck. It was thousands of years of the human body and human food culture evolving together, side by side, like two puzzle pieces slowly being carved to fit each other. Now, before this starts to sound like an endorsement, it wasn't foolproof and it wasn't free of risk. This is important, so don't skip this part. Archaeological and anthropological evidence also shows plenty of cases where it went horribly wrong. Botulism, one of the deadliest toxins on Earth, caused by bacteria that thrive specifically in low oxygen, poorly controlled fermentation, was a very real killer. Entire family groups have been recorded, even in more recent history, dying together after eating meat that fermented incorrectly, usually because it wasn't salted enough, wasn't cold enough, or was sealed the wrong way. This was one of the leading causes of accidental death tied to food throughout deep human history, right alongside starvation itself. This is exactly why these food preparation methods were never casual. They were treated with the seriousness of a ritual. Specific people in a community were often the ones responsible for preparing fermented foods, using techniques passed down with extreme precision, because the margin between safely aged and lethal could be a matter of days, temperature, or a single mistake in how the animal was sealed. So the real story isn't that ancient humans were immune to rotten meat or too tough to get sick. The real story is that they had developed an extremely precise inherited body of knowledge for walking the line between decomposition that heals and decomposition that kills. And when that knowledge was followed exactly, it worked. When it wasn't, people died. That tension is what makes this so fascinating. This wasn't recklessness. It was one of the most sophisticated, unwritten sciences early humans ever developed. Here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about your own kitchen. A huge amount of food humans eat today in cultures all over the world is technically the descendant of these ancient controlled decomposition techniques. Aged cheese is, at a molecular level, controlled bacterial and fungal breakdown of milk. Cured meats like salami and prosciutto rely on the exact same principle ancient humans used: salt, thyme, and the right bacteria to outcompete the wrong bacteria. Fish sauce, used in millions of meals across Asia every single day, is fermented fish left to break down for months. Even something as ordinary as a well-aged steak, the kind restaurants proudly advertise as dry-aged 45 days, is using a refined, modern, temperature-controlled version of the same basic idea your ancient ancestors were using in a cave, a pit, or a sealed skin tens of thousands of years earlier. The disgust you feel looking at a rotten-looking piece of meat isn't some universal biological law. It's largely cultural. It's been trained into you by a modern food system built around refrigeration, one that's less than 150 years old, a blink of an eye compared to the roughly 300,000 years humans have existed. Your ancestors, just a handful of generations back in many parts of the world, would have looked at some of what you consider spoiled and seen a perfectly good meal, maybe even a special one, saved for a celebration or a long winter. So the next time you see a wheel of blue cheese, a jar of fish sauce, or a strip of dry-aged beef, you're not looking at something disconnected from ancient survival. You're looking at the exact same principle your ancestors used to survive brutal winters, when the difference between eating and starving came down to understanding exactly how and how far meat could be allowed to break down before it turned from food into poison. They didn't have microscopes. They didn't have food safety labels or expiration dates. What they had was tens of thousands of years of trial and error, passed down as tradition, myth, ritual, and hard rules that were followed exactly because the cost of getting it wrong was death. And in a strange way, every time you eat a piece of aged cheese, a cured salami, or a splash of fish sauce, you're tasting a direct link to that ancient knowledge. Knowledge that helped keep the human species alive long enough for you to exist at all. If this changed the way you look at food, you're going to want to see the video where we cover what ancient humans did when they ran out of food completely, because what some groups turned to next is even harder to believe than this one. Subscribe if you want to keep uncovering the hidden survival science behind everyday human history, because the more we dig into it, the clearer it becomes. Nothing about ancient life was primitive. It was precise, tested, and passed down at the cost of real lives. I'll see you in the next one.